Yes, ma'am.
So what's the consideration of not publicize the plaintiff's name? What's the consideration for that?
Well, over the years, a number of people have contacted me and have wanted to file lawsuits challenging various admissions policies or employment policies, contracting policies. They were afraid of retribution. Frankly, I have had my name on lawsuits, and Ed Chen has had his name on lawsuits, and nothing has ever happened in terms of retribution. Ed was a faculty member at the University of Houston. His university never came after him. There may have been some grumbling, perhaps, but there's been. But parents were concerned that their 17 or 18-year-old son or daughter going off to Rice instead of Harvard would be penalized, that faculty members and fellow students would not agree with challenging these kinds of policies. So over the years, it's been difficult to find people who would stand up and put their name on a lawsuit. So our options were limited because we knew we wanted a large group of students to participate. So forming this organization and having them join was a way that their parents felt more comfortable that, all right, look, my son applied to Harvard, he's at Stanford, that's a good outcome, but one day he might want to apply to medical school. And lo and behold, if he's known as the man who killed affirmative action, applying to medical school, maybe that will harm him. So that was the rationale behind that. Yes, sir?
I have two questions. The first question is, do we still consider the Asian Americans minority group, or is part of the majority? Because affirmative action is for protecting the minorities because of the social economic status. So do we today consider Asian community is a part of the majority group? That's the first question. Now, second question, if we believe that the beneficiaries of the Asian discrimination are the white Americans, the Hispanic Americans, African Americans, how do we make that determination? If we find that it is really the African American communities or the Hispanic students are really the beneficiary, how do we win the support to our lawsuit?
Okay, two good questions. The first is sort of a legal policy question. The second, I think, addresses some kind of social issues and policy issues. Let me address the first question. Are Asians a minority? Well, I think they are recognized as a separate ethnic group and race for the purposes of various public policy arenas. There are four that come up. Contracting, if there is a small Asian-owned business person in this group, and the city of Houston wants to build a new swimming pool at a community center and puts that bid out for consideration, Asians are considered as a minority group in that arena. Employment, voting, and university admissions, pretty much the same thing. So for the most part, some Asians, don't ask me the rationale behind it. For instance, Pakistanis are considered a racial minority group that would benefit from these kinds of affirmative action policies, but Afghans are not. Don't ask me how that came about, but as Ed Chen will tell you, we learned a lot litigating various cases over the years. So the answer is yes, Asians are still considered a minority. Now, I think perhaps the press certain advocates on both sides of the issue will sort of lump together whites and Asians in kind of one pile and consider blacks and Hispanics in another pile. You brought up the issue of socioeconomic issues. This is a very important point, and I'm glad you brought that up. Often I am asked, well, if you win and Harvard has to open up its admissions process in a colorblind way, that is, they cannot consider whether Mr. Patel is Indian, or Mr. Chow is Asian, or Mr. Rabinowitz is Jewish, or Mr. Garcia. If they do it in a race-blind way, then all that you're going to have are a bunch of Asians, at Harvard. What do you think about that? Is that a good thing? And my answer is, I frankly don't care. And then the follow-up answer is, if you're concerned that we have institutions throughout this country that will be, for the most part, majority Asian, and then white, and very few Hispanics, and very few African Americans, then there's a way that we can go about creating diverse environments without raising the bar or lowering the bar for people based upon their race. And that is, if Harvard said, all right, we're no longer allowed to use race, but we want to have 15% of our incoming class from disadvantaged backgrounds, where maybe mom and dad earned less than $40,000 a year, or we wanted to make sure that we had kids who kind of grew up in tough neighborhoods or went to lousy high schools, but proved to be, academically competitive, even though they went to a lousy high school in a lousy neighborhood. And we're going to lower the bar for those kids a little bit. That's fine. I think that's a great idea. And that, perhaps, we think, will help admit a sufficient number of African Americans, Hispanics, and kids, Asian kids, whose dad is a shrimper down in Angleton, who's first-generation Vietnamese, who attends a lousy high school, but he happened to be the class valedictorian. Maybe he's not as competitive as a Vietnamese kid who went to Strake Jesuit or Kincaid or St. John's or something. But maybe that bar is lowered a little bit for him as well. So that was part of your first question. Now your second question is, how do we convince people of this? Well, I don't think we need to do much of that. We're going to do some. We have to continue doing that. But polling data suggests that America has really moved to our side. That during the Fisher litigation, when Fisher was at the Supreme Court, the Gallup poll and other polling organizations did numerous polls in 2012, 2013, and then some in 2014. But the year that Abby's case was at the Supreme Court and was about to be decided, the Gallup poll did a number of polls, and they asked the following question, because you can really affect the outcome of a poll by the way you ask a question. They asked Americans, do you think a student's race should be considered when they apply to college? Pretty simple question. Not, do you think a student's race should be considered in order to overcome, years of slavery, or in order to create a harmonious, racial, diverse environment? Just, do you think your kid's race should be used? Period. It's a pretty simple question. 55% of Americans, 65% of Americans answered that question as no. And African Americans split just about evenly on that question. Just about evenly. I think it was 48 to 52 said, no, your race shouldn't be a factor. So I think as long as we continue finding plaintiffs, we continue to articulate these issues in a way that America understands. Look, everybody's got you know, a son, a daughter, a grandson, a nephew, a niece that will be applying to college. And everybody pretty much wants a fair shake for those kids. And most of America realizes now that admissions is a zero-sum game. If you lower the bar for some, you're raising it for others. And that's just unfair, and it's just un-American. So I think we're moving in the right direction there. That's a long answer. You guys must be sick of listening. Yes, sir.
Mr. Blum, I think Professor Lee took the question beyond the college admission. Before the lecture, we talked about our mutual friend, S.B. Wu. I think we all have been supporting S.B. Wu for his fight to execute the Executive Order 11246.
Yeah.
At that time, I think we support him, we put a full-page ad on the Washington Post. But I think at the Fisher vs. UT case, he started to divert from the majority of the Asian American groups. Because I think the majority of the group feels that we are against the quota system. But we had reservation to throw away the racial as a factor completely at this time. Going back to Professor Lee's question, I think if we go beyond the college admission, when we talk about workplace, what's your position on equal opportunity and also affirmative action?
Well, I'm going to back up just a little bit and talk about S.B. Wu. This is my third presentation to Chinese groups. I mentioned to you I've been to Nassau County in New York on Long Island and then Livingston, New Jersey. And a couple of people have brought this up to me. And I'll be the first to admit that I don't know of the tension and the internal debate within 80/20 and SB Wu. I think each public policy arena has unique features to it. And employment is one of the most complex and complicated areas in which race becomes an issue. And my response to your question is nuanced, and I'm going to just give you an example of this. While it is ideal for employers, public employers and private employers, to be forbidden to use race or ethnicity in the hiring process or the promotion process, there are instances in which that becomes something that probably should be done. And I'm just going to give you one example. City of Houston, which is a public as opposed to private, City of Houston has a police department. That police department has to police a very multiracial, multi-ethnic city. There are requirements within law enforcement that would dictate that a certain number of Hispanic police officers are hired. Just because, number one, they have language skills, number two, they look Hispanic, and three, they can go undercover. So if there are Hispanic gangs operating in Houston, it's going to be pretty difficult to send, David Cowell as a police officer or Edward Blum as a police officer into that kind of a situation. That's one example. The second example, let's see. I'm Jewish. And let's say I own a company that provides kosher food products in New York City to kosher grocery stores and supermarkets. And I need salespersons to call on these various kosher shops. And I run an ad, and I get two applicants, one black, one white who's Jewish, who keeps kosher. Now, do I have the right to tell the black that, well, I'm going to not hire you because you're black? I need a white Jewish kosher employee to call on these white kosher butchers. And I can kind of flip it around a little bit. Suppose I'm African American and I have a African American beauty products company, and I need salespersons to take my products around to African American beauty shops and barber shops and things like that. And two applicants show up, one's Chinese and the other one's black. Do I have the right at that point to tell the Chinese, hey David, I'm not hiring you because you're Chinese, I'm going to hire this black woman because she... So just a couple of examples that I hope clarify that employment law is a little is distinct from some of the other arenas that I hope that answered your question.
First example, one step further. I think we understand, especially in Southwest Houston, I think we did Asian police officers because of language, culture, and many of those issues.
Yeah.
But if we take the question one step further, how about some ethnic representation and the leadership of the police department?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it, you know, I wrestle with it. I think what the, so I wear two hats. I wear an amateur lawyer hat, and then I wear just a sort of an American citizen hat. So let me put on my amateur lawyer cap and answer the question. I think those are intensive fact-finding issues that that courts have examined pretty carefully. The most recent case was a case of firefighters in New Haven, Connecticut. The New Haven firefighters have, if they want to advance up the hierarchy from firefighter to lieutenant to captain, et cetera, they have to take an exam. And the Hispanics and African Americans that took the exam scored much lower on the exam than did the whites, and I don't know if there were any Asians there, but they scored much lower than the white applicants. And the way the civil service in New Haven was structured was the highest achieving scores were then put into a pool that then went on to become considered for lieutenant and what have you. So that was unique because, you know, kind of a firefighter is a firefighter. You know, you're out there putting out, there are no Asian fires or African American fires, they're just fires. So that was kind of unique. Now, if a case came from the New Haven police officers about that same exam that African Americans didn't do as well on as whites, the court might, you know, the court might say, well, you know, because there are no ethnic fires, but there are kind of ethnic policing issues, maybe, you know, maybe we need to allow for a jurisdiction to take lower scoring applicants and promote them, because there are police issues that, so that's sort of the amateur lawyer in me. The American in me says, well, you know, look, I'd like to eliminate the whole thing, but you know, maybe there are just instances, narrow instances in which affirmative action in employment could be considered.
I think the reason I pose the question is not an hypothetical one. In Houston, that really happened because we're not talking about promotion. Because if we talk about top rank police officer, he's appointed. Okay, basically the mayor or the county judge
Yeah.
will not influence that process.
Yeah.
And a few years ago, when we had the Chinese American police vice police chief retire, that position was not going to be filled by a Chinese American. Many people in this room went to the city hall. We talked to the city council member, we talked to the mayor, we went to the city council meeting, testified. As a result, we fight. And we got that position filled again by a Chinese American. I think the people in this room can tell you how much difference that makes. when you have the top-ranking Chinese American and the top-ranking police officer, that makes a difference. We have a person we go to. Now today we have people at both the Houston City Police Department as well as in Harris County Sheriff's Office. It helps a lot.
I can see that, yeah. I guess that the idea of political appointment is, I don't think you can probably bring a suit against the city of Houston for a political appointee, but if there were, you know, the example I gave from New Haven, if something like that existed and Asians were being passed over for lower scoring whites, Hispanics, and African Americans, then a lawsuit could probably be initiated.
Yeah, I mean, to follow up on this question, now, as you just elaborated, you have to compare apples with apples. Some of the cases are unique. Now, the Fisher case, the Harvard case, is about education. It's not about employment. Right. I mean, this is a common law country. When you apply cases, you have to apply the facts. So what is the nexus between the possible outcome of this case on the other affirmative action cases? What is the nexus? I mean, why do you think people are even worried about that?
That's a great question, and it is, I think Ed Chen and I know from our experience in sort of the public arena, trying to convince people to vote in elections that end all of this. Education is the most important of those four policy arenas: contracting, employment, voting in elections, and education. And the reason is it speaks to itself. Everybody has been to school. Everybody has competed in some manner. I say everybody, most have competed in some manner in school. We have now the vast majority of kids applying to college, competing to get into college. We understand all of that. We understand what being admitted to Harvard means in the life of our children and grandchildren. So the nexus is that if we win this, if we win the education battle, we've probably won about 75% of the battle in all. That employment, elections, and contracting will evolve in that direction as well. But if we can end this practice with the Harvard and UNC lawsuits, and the court strike down the use of race, we've accomplished pretty much, I think, what we need to accomplish. Ed, you want to talk about
Let me just make some comments about Edward. First of all, he mentioned that he was Jewish. He's also been back to Israel to fight against the war there. And so he is not only a patriot of the United States, but he's also a very good Jew. And we have to remember that he and the United States at the present is turning certainly against Israel and the Jewish people, and we hope that we can get support for Israel from the United States. My question to you, though, well, okay, and also he did fight the affirmative action at the City Hall that you were talking about. We were on what was it? We had a vote.
Referendum.
We had a referendum. Yeah. We had a referendum to say that we would end the affirmative action policies of the city of Houston. It didn't win. We thought we were going to win, but at the very last they came in and they actually defeated that particular one. But my question to you is, people have been saying, and he's also a Republican, and I'm a Republican, I was the vice chairman of the Harris County Republican Party. People have been saying that the Asian people have been going away from the Republican Party to the Democrat Party. And what can we do as Republicans, you and I, help to convince people that if you do go and vote, I'm not going to say how you should vote, but look at the candidates, see which ones are better for you and for the United States of America, as Ed Blum is doing, because he is really a real patriot. And so how about the question with respect to what can we do to help get more Republican Asians?
Oh God, Ed, that is a great question, and I am not going to answer it.
Well, I will work. I've been continuing to work within the community, and what I would say to you then is go out and participate in whether you want to be a Democrat or Republican. I hope you'll be a Republican, but go out and participate and do something. Don't just stand there. Okay?
If I had any insight into that, Ed, I would have been able to convince my co-religionists to vote Republican.
I know.
And as all of you know, Jews and Asians now give about 75% of their vote to Democrats. So if I had any answers at all, Ed, I would have already put them in motion within my own community, let alone. Yeah.
Let's just get back to this case. Is there any possibility that the Supreme Court is not going to hear this case?
Oh, sure, David. Yeah, absolutely. There are, as you may know, I'll just tell you, about every year, the Supreme Court has somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000 requests for oral argument. That is, there are 7,000 to 8,000 appeals from lower courts that go to the Supreme Court every year. Of those 7,000 to 8,000, the Supreme Court takes about 70 to 80. They used to take more, so it's really about 1% of all cases get taken up by the Supreme Court. Although that's of the 7,000, probably 4,000 are not worthy of consideration. So, but there are many thousands that are worthy of consideration, and to have 75 out of 2,000 or 3,000 is still a very small number. So, the reason we're hopeful that either this case gets taken up or the University of North Carolina case gets taken up, and there's no guarantee which one makes it first. Both of them bring up similar legal issues, identical legal issues, but just with different sets of facts, as you say. So the court seems to pay attention to this issue. The media pays a lot of attention to this issue. Unfortunately or fortunately, the media pays a lot of attention to kind of the cases that I'm bringing. So that can be good on the one hand and bad on the other. But when Harvard starts to reach a critical point in the appellate process, everybody already knows about Harvard. Every justice on the Supreme Court knows about this lawsuit. Their clerks know about this lawsuit. The articles that they read, the blogs, the legal press, they know all about this. Every twist and turn in this litigation is going to be publicized. So, when it does knock on their door, it won't be for lack of them not really knowing about it or thinking, this is just one of the many thousands that we get. It'll be a very high-profile case. And frankly, the Harvard case is the ideal case to bring. It is the ideal case. And I think the justices may recognize that. It wouldn't surprise me if North Carolina goes up first, that they just sit on North Carolina, waiting for Harvard to come. Or they take North Carolina and they reach down into the lower courts and say, hey, this is an identical lawsuit. We know all about this lawsuit. Let's bring both of them up at the same time. They've done that in other cases as well.
And the next one is going to be really important to potential donors. What if Harvard says, okay, plaintiff, I'm offering you a seat. Okay, you can transfer from UC Berkeley to Harvard. Let us settle.
Oh, yes, that's a great question. It's funny, you'll appreciate this being the real lawyer between the two of us. The court in the First District Court of Appeals has rules, or maybe it's the district court has rules, that before the discovery process begins, the two sides must submit to the court a joint memo in which they discuss their efforts at reaching a compromise. And so we had to do this. It's not like, you know, all right, so we said, yes, we'll be willing to drop the lawsuit if you will admit the one student that is mentioned in the complaint and the others that have now joined Students for Fair Admissions, and Harvard drops the use of race and ethnicity completely going forward, and you pay our legal fees. Oh, yeah, we threw that last one in too, and of course they declined. They declined all that.
I don't blame them.
Yeah, so I would have taken out the legal fees and wanted to see if they would agree to the other 2 points. Yeah, I'm gonna. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So the Harvard case is currently under discovery stage. Does that mean Harvard has to open their admission data to the public?
They have to open it to us,
Okay.
and we're now in the process of telling the court and telling Harvard what we want. And of course, what we have told Harvard what we want is really quite overwhelming to Harvard. Harvard's quite distressed about what we have asked for. We have asked for every admission file going back to 2008. And Harvard said, well, that means that you want 5.9 million pieces of paper. And we said, yes, we want 5.9 million pieces of paper. And they said, that's not going to happen. And we said, well, we'll meet you halfway. Instead of 5.9 million pieces of paper, we'll select 1 million pieces of paper at random. We'll get our expert, you get your expert, we'll go to the database, and we'll just pick 1 million pieces of paper at random, and we'll settle for that instead of the 5.9 that would cover everyone. So we haven't heard back from Harvard on that yet, but this is the process that we're in. And ultimately, if we want this and Harvard says no way, then the judge will decide how much to turn over. But because this is a civil rights lawsuit, in the past, civil rights lawsuits have been very factually intensive. So we anticipate the court being sympathetic to providing us with more information than Harvard wants to provide.
So can you predict the bottom line? Where will be the bottom line for you?
For me?
How much information you want?
Well, we want it all, but we'll be very satisfied if we get, I guess we'd be happy with maybe 40,000 individual applicant files chosen at random over a 5 or 6 year period. And we want the incomplete data set, the computer data set. So all that they have to do is provide us with a hard drive with all of their admissions data on it. And then we can look at maybe 40,000 individual students to see how they were treated during the interview process. So, sir.
Yes, Mr. Blum, you've spent 20, 30 years studying these admissions processes, so I wanted to ask you this question. What have you learned regarding the Harvard admissions process with respect to the test scores? And the reason I ask this is, a few weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal, Oklahoma University published a full-page ad where it set forth how many students in the top 10 schools in the United States had National Merit Scholars. So these are the highest scoring students on the standardized test scores. I was surprised to see that Harvard only had 300 approximately out of an entering class of 1,600. So only 300 of the 1,600 Harvard students are in the top scores of the SAT. So something's going on inside of Harvard where they do not assign to the standardized test scores the importance that you seem to assign on your statistics here that you put forth. So something's going on there that doesn't value the standardized test scores as highly as you would appear to value them. So what do you know about the internal process? Why isn't it that 1,600 students at Harvard are National Merit Scholars? That's my question.
It's an excellent question. And I don't know that I've got a sufficient answer for you. I know that the applicant pool, I'm going to take you just a little bit into the legal weeds on this, and David, come bail me out if I'm stepping water. What we're attempting to show the court is something that the government attempts to prove in an antitrust case. So, let me give an example. Coke and Pepsi seem to have the same price at the grocery store day after day, week after week. Coke goes up a dime, Pepsi goes up a dime. Coke goes down a dime, Pepsi goes down a dime. Whereas root beer and ginger ale, one goes up $1, the other one goes down 50 cents. The other one goes up 50 cents, the other one goes down 50 cents. The fact that Coke and Pepsi seem to move in tandem, whereas Dr. Pepper, root beer, and other soft drinks fly around in price, suggests in an antitrust case that there is collusion between Coke and Pepsi. And that's sufficient for the government to bring an antitrust case and to get into Coke and Pepsi's private files. So, going back to the SAT scores and the national merits, we recognize that, that of the 1,600 students applying to Harvard, of the 35,000 that apply to Harvard, Harvard could tease out every kid who scored 2,400 on the SAT and was a National Merit Scholar. Just those people, put their names in a hopper, pull out 1,600 of them, and there'd still be quite a few thousand left over. So we're not arguing to the courts that that's what Harvard needs to do. What we're arguing to the courts is that of those names in the hopper that Harvard puts in with the 2,400, the perfect 4.0 GPA and all of that, they are reaching in and pulling out a name, and it's Sam Chen, and they're looking at their tally sheet and saying, no, we have enough. They're pulling out a name, Sam Garcia, saying, okay, that's a good one. Sam Washington, yeah, that's a good one. Sam Anderson or O'Malley, yeah, that's a good one too. So it doesn't surprise me that much that Harvard, doesn't have an entire class filled with National Merit Scholars. But I know one thing that I'm positive of, and that is if we're successful, they're going to have a lot more. Because there will be, instead of 17% of incoming freshmen being Asian, it'll probably jump up like Caltech did. And those kids are going to be National Merit finalists and scholars. So, does that answer your question?
Sort of. I mean, I think the whole process is fairly mysterious.
It is. It is mysterious. And Harvard makes it mysterious. And it's going to be an enormous burden to overcome that mysteriousness. What we're hopeful to find during this discovery process is that there are, hundreds of people that we hope to interview. And somebody's going to say, a few will say, hey, the admissions committee asked me to interview kids in the LA area, and I went out and I interviewed 15, and they told me, of the 15, give us your 5 best. And I sent the names in, and I got an email or I got a call, probably a call, from somebody saying, gee, of these 15 names, 4 are Asian. Can't you do any better than that? So we suspect that we're going to find people that are going to come forward and tell us those experiences. Yeah. Yes?
When you talk about fair admission, are you only taking out race as a factor? Because I'm thinking in my head there's disability is part of the factor, sexual orientation, gender. Someone is always going to feel that they're at the smaller percentage. So if we take race out of factor, we'll have more. So when or if Caucasian students become a smaller percentage, are they going to fight again? Because in my head, I'm just thinking this is never going to end because there's always going to be somebody, a group that's at a smaller percentage.
Well, let's hope you're wrong, but that's a common concern. Race in America is very unique. Legally, race is a world unto itself. If Harvard said, you know what, the admissions committee sat down and we decided that we're going to admit only people taller than men, taller than, no, that's a bad example. We're only going to admit people that are really swell dancers. We just want great dancers here at Harvard, and the hell with anything else. It's stupid, it's foolish, but they can do that. The law, when it pertains to race, is very unique. So if Harvard said, well, hey, we want more disabled people, or we want some additional gays, or we want some additional heterosexual, as long as race isn't part of that equation, that's something that, that they can pursue.
In other words, it is only the racial policy in Harvard admission that you're attacking, not anything else.
It's just that. Eugenia?
I just have some experience to share with you. We have 2 children, okay? The girl is 6 years older than the boy. When she was just the 2nd year in high school, she came to us. She said that she was going to college. I said, where? She said, Rice. I said, you got admitted? She said, yes. And she had 1 SAT, but not the 2nd one. So she wasn't a National Merit Scholar. She had good grades, so she went to Rice with full scholarship. Okay, but she was an electrical engineering major. That went fine. When my son graduated, both of them went to Bel Air High School. He was National Merit Scholar. He was the top 3% of his class. He got rejected from Rice. And I thought, well, he didn't do any worse than his sister. So I got to talk to one of the members of the admission, on the admission committee. So she sat down with me, and I said, what's wrong with my son's record? I really felt he had a very good record. She said, yes. She said, there are 3 things wrong with your son's admission. I said, okay, tell me. She said, okay, number 1 thing was he went to Bel Air High School. At the time, Bel Air High School was the best high school in Houston. And he said there are 30, 40, 50 of the National Merit Scholar from Bel Air High School. He's just one of them. I said that's correct. And number 2, he said he's not the top 1%. He's about the 3%. I said that's correct. So he said another thing is he applied for biology. At Rice, there was no pre-med. Biology is pre-med. That's very difficult. He said, 1 more thing. I said, what's the 1 more thing? He said, we want diversity. I said, okay. What's that diversity? You mean race? He said, actually, no. I said, well, then what? He said, we go by how your name starts. See? I said, so if you mean, if your name is Johnson or Jones, that would be the most difficult. She said something like that. I said, even the Chinese from Taiwan, we are the old Chinese. A lot of the Chinese starts with C. Okay, it's Chan, it's C-H-A-N-G, all that. But the people came from mainland. A lot of them start with X, Y, Z. And those are in much better shape than the one starts with C.
Oh, God, if you could only have recorded that, Eugenia, that would have been...
So, I was just telling you, I told my son, I said, well, you know, you had good grades and everything. I said, he said, well, I have a place to go anyway because he could go to UPR, A&M, it's no problem. But that thing kind of amazed me a little.
It's an amazing story. Thanks for sharing that with us, sir.
Just two comments. We have been into enough of that admission or school admission meetings, and they always say, we are looking for the whole package of the student. So that means if you are like shot put, national number 2, you don't need a 2400 SAT, you can get into Harvard, okay? Or you have started up 2 companies when you're high school, then you don't need a 2400 SAT, okay? So getting to that, that means their admission process is a complete different perspective rather than we Asian always think 2400 SAT, that's all you need to get to Harvard. It's not the case, first. And second, last name is very tricky, especially in America. We have seen enough Chinese last name, but their look is totally Caucasian. Okay, with L-I-U, last name, you think it's Chinese, but when you look at the real person, it's a Caucasian. Because in America, there are so many interracial marriage. You know what? Al Gore's daughter married to a Chinese. So now Al Gore's grandkids is a last name L-E-E. So he belongs to half Chinese or half Al Gore. So ethnic group is very tricky because once they get interracial marriage, then become dropped down to half and half. You classify them in Chinese, Asian, or Caucasian. That's why in NIH, in biomedical research, now they drop ethnic. Because if you need to look at it, you need to check every single base in your DNA. See whether you are really Chinese, Asian, or what, or mixed, you know? So if we are getting to that, I'm trying to point out in front of you, Mr. Blum, if you really need to know what Harvard admission process is, get all the data. And you can have a complete picture, even though it's a 5 million documents. Otherwise, they will say, well, we only have 10% of our data. And you cannot draw a conclusion by this small statistics. Or you only randomly take 1 million document or 40,000 people. This is not a majority of the case. Their admission process is way more completed.
So I'm going to give one more anecdote and then take another couple of questions, and then I've got a plane to catch in a little bit. But here's it's not an anecdote. It's a very important part of the lawsuit. And all of you, and I appreciate everyone's comments about the complexity and mysteries of university admissions, especially places like Harvard and Rice and America's most competitive universities. We have a laboratory for how this really began and how it's and how it played out over the years. And the laboratory began in the 1920s at Harvard. And we spend a lot of time on in our complaint against Harvard about this, and that is because of America's immigration policies in the late 1800s. By the early 1920s, a number of Eastern European Jews had moved to the United States And because of a variety of reasons, most attribute that to sort of the culture, the family culture, and the emphasis on academic achievements. More and more Jews were applying to Harvard, and at that time, Harvard admitted strictly on a meritocracy. You had to take an exam, you had to get a couple of, I think, recommendations, but it was basically, you scored 2,400 on the SAT, you're applying, or that version of the SAT back in the 1920s, you're at Harvard. And by 1924, almost 30% of Harvard's freshman class was Jewish. 30% of Harvard's freshman class was Jewish. And what percentage did Jews make up of the United States back in the 1920s? Well, I think it was less than 2%. I'm estimating that. It's less than, I think, 2% now. But so what did Harvard do? What happened at Harvard? What did everyone think about this? Well, the alumni and the administration at Harvard had a fit. This is completely documented in a number of books and articles and essays that the senior administration, the president of Harvard, was receiving letters complaining from alumni that they go to the Harvard football games, and literally, I'll never forget this, an influential alumni wrote to the president. He says, "I look to my left, what do I see? Nothing but Jews. I look to my right, what do I see? Nothing but Jews. Something has got to change." And lo and behold, Harvard instituted what, for lack of a better term, the Harvard Plan. The Harvard Plan was instituted, and that meant that the test, the role of the test, the importance of the test was greatly diminished, and some new factors were added to Harvard's admissions criteria. What were those factors? Something called leadership abilities. Leadership abilities and geographic locations. So that because most Jews lived in Philadelphia, New York, New Jersey, Baltimore, that Harvard was no longer going to just admit people who had great scores from those areas. They wanted, they wanted kids from other areas and other kids who had leadership abilities. Well, what happened the first year this new plan went into effect at Harvard? It's documented in our complaint. It's documented everywhere. Jewish students dropped from about 30, not quite 30% of the admissions pool to about 10% overnight. And it remained at about 10%, I think, through the 1970s or so, when it then started to go up slightly as a percentage. Harvard does not ask what your religion is. There's some anecdotal evidence that Jewish admissions has gone up a little bit since the 1970s. But that's what the original Harvard plan was all about, limiting Jews. Harvard had a Jewish problem. Today, Harvard has an Asian problem. So, yes, sir.
First of all, I want to thank you for taking this initiative and making a complaint. And on behalf of Pakistani American, I really appreciate all of you that come out and do the support for this, because not only Asian is affecting this matter. I mean, the Chinese, every Asian, every Pakistani is going through with the same problems. I have my own 3 kids and I've gone through with the same situation. So I really appreciate that you're taking this initiative to make the changes, because what I see here in the community is our kids go to the same school. It doesn't matter to go to Bel Air, go to Cypher, go to Cardinal. Our kids go to the same school. They have the same opportunity as a white, black, Hispanic, Asian. They have the same professor. They have the same curriculum. But what we do, we parents put more attention on our kids, make sure, and they give their support, they stand all night long to make sure they study, work hard, and go to the Ivy League school. But end of the day, what happened, they got discriminated because of the affirmative actions. And, I just want to make sure that, Pakistani community also supporting this cause, and hopefully the Harvard and all the other Ivy League schools, they stop discriminating policies, and that just go, especially on merit basis, because the merit will make the America more stronger, not the discrimination. I mean, if you see that America, as you said, when the Jews was coming, I mean, yeah, they are perfect people. They have a good score, and they are top of the line. That's what we're seeing in Asian. We Asian as a top of the line score. So I think the discrimination should be stopped, and it should go on merit basis. And I would also like to support that we need to see more people here, more Asian, not only Chinese. We need to see Vietnamese, we need to see Pakistani, we need to all Asian to come and support this cause to make a better America.
I agree with that. Thank you for adding that. Yes, sir.
Just one more question. I would say we still have a long fight to go, and even if we win this one, and I think towards the road, end goal of achieving the Asian equality, this is just one big milestone. And even after this milestone, we have a lot more things to do. So, and also I want to tie to the suggestion Ed just made that how to engage more Asians to participate in politics. So especially when we want to recruit more Republicans. I tend to become a Republican as well, so I used to be pretty on the Democrat side. But I would want to say that we need to do the homework on both sides. On your side, you're helping us to achieve that. And what kind of suggestions you have for us Asians that what we can do in terms of self-help to change the situation, both in terms of socioeconomic status as well as other aspects, politics?
I think something remarkable has happened within the Asian community. And by Asian, I mean South Asia, Pakistan, India, Malaysia, Indonesia. I'm talking, and the sort of the Asian continent and subcontinent. Something has changed over the last year. And I think the first thing that happened, and it goes to the heart of what needs to be done, is when a number of legislators in the state of California introduced a bill to overturn Proposition 209, the citizen-led initiative that ended race-based affirmative action in California. That looked like that was on a very fast-moving train. There was overwhelming support from Democrats in the California legislature, and Governor Brown said that he would sign it if that bill came to him. And what happened? Well, the Asian community in California mobilized, and I have never seen anything like this happen within the Asian community before. They mobilized, they began a process of signing a petition. Within a week, 100,000 names had been gathered. Groups went to Sacramento and lobbied Asian Democrat legislators. Those Asian Democrat legislators pulled their support for it, and the leadership in the California legislature pulled the bill. That was a remarkable experience. Nothing like that I have ever seen come as a mobilized group out of the Asian community. So I think between that, perhaps the Harvard lawsuit, just the sense of political empowerment, that Asians are just not going to take this anymore. And often, I don't say this disparagingly, when I would talk to parents about the Harvard lawsuit, I was told that, we Asians are taught, come here, work harder than anybody else, and keep your head down. Don't make waves. Well, you're going to have to make some waves. I'm not saying it has to be a tsunami, but you've got to make waves. You've got to get involved in sort of the legal process and all this, and then the political process and all this, because there is an enormous opportunity, I think, for Asians to flex political muscle. And it doesn't matter whether they, well, actually, it does matter.
It does, Ed, it does.
Yeah, I have to stop myself, Ed.
Yeah, okay.
Last question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. First off, thank you for this informative session for us. And I'm really curious about how you're picking up those plaintiffs. Like, how's the background will be eligible for your case? For example, you mentioned the SAT scores. It might be high enough to beat up the other students who have already been enrolled in Harvard, but what about the other backgrounds, especially the more soft skills, like public services or those things? Let me step back a little bit, because when I outreach a lot of Asian communities, I try to ask them, invite them to be more supportive in this case. They will be more confident of like saying, oh, wait a minute, our kids truly are not selected by Harvard, because I think we only have high scores. We don't have other things. Or how do you see the other factors will be involved?
That's a great insight. Here's what, we have expert witnesses that are known scholars in this area. We've got 3 of them, one law professor at UCLA, another one at the Century Foundation in Washington, and then one at Duke. We have looked at that. I mean, is it possible that Asian applicants are they're just science nerds? Is this all they are? They get 2400 SAT, 4.0, and they win the Intel National Science Award because they built a drone. And other than that, they're just not interesting kind of kids. They're not edgy the way other kids are, and they don't do funky things. And that's not the case at all. We've done random samplings of thousands of applicants to the UC system, specifically UCLA undergraduate law, Berkeley undergraduate, Berkeley law, and at Duke. That's a pretty representative sample of very competitive universities. Those, if you just white out the names of the kids, Asian kids are indistinguishable for the most part from white kids. They're doing all the same things. They're volunteering. They're playing golf. They're playing tennis. They're starting businesses. They're building drones. They're doing all of that. So the argument that Harvard may offer, be an embarrassing one, but desperation may call for them to do it, is that these Asian kids they're really smart, but they're just all science nerds. They're just not interesting enough. Well, we've got data that we can show that that's not the case.
Right. In addition to this question is, well, as you just mentioned, Harvard may use that strategy, but we can show our proof that we have super qualified students, Asian students who are not selected by or enrolled by Harvard because of just race or some very possibly that situation, like just because the last names are the main factor. And my question or my curiosity is how, from the big data, we can see that statistics, we can see this is very reasonable to be skeptical to see their enrollment admission requirements is very different to the Asian cases. But how do we do that in our case by case, like individual plaintiff, to compare? Okay, this one is good enough to be in Harvard, but he's not enrolled. The other one is like that.
That's a great question. We don't have to prove that. Okay. Yeah, we don't have to question every decision Harvard has made. Harvard's going to say, well, we already had like 4 tennis players. We really wanted a We wanted a banjo player instead, and we had a golfer that was, a good putter, but we needed somebody that, we don't have to prove any of that. All that we have to prove, and this makes the case a little easier for us, is that systematically, as the applicant pool has grown, Harvard's numbers have remained the same. And the data that we're able to analyze and present to the court, we think will be sufficient for them to say, okay, this is, you deny it's a quota, you deny it because you needed more violin players or you needed more tuba players, and I think the court will reject that based on the overwhelming statistical analysis that will come from this tripling of the numbers of Asians, the quality of those Asians, and the flatlining of all of that. That ought to do it. If not, then the Supreme Court will do it.
Thank you very much.
I've got to go. I'm sorry.